Rain fell on Pearl Harbor like tears from a wounded sky. It was October 1942, and the scars of December still marked this place. Twisted steel rose from the shallow water where battleships had died. Cranes worked through the night, pulling wreckage from graves that held 1,000 sailors. And in the shadow of all that death, something new waited at Pier 7, a weapon the enemy had never seen. The USS Sawfish sat low in the black water. She was a Gato-Class submarine, 312 feet of American steel designed for one purpose: to hunt. Her diesel engines could push her across 11,000 miles of ocean. Her batteries could keep her hidden beneath the waves for days. But her true power lay in what she carried inside her belly. 24 torpedoes. Commander Henry Rourke stood on the wet deck and watched his crew load them. Each torpedo weighed 3,000 pounds. Each one cost $10,000. Each one could break a ship in half. Before the Gato-Class, American submarines carried only 12. Now they carried enough death to sink a small fleet. Rourke was 38 years old. His hair had gone gray at the temples since Wake Island, since he had watched his previous boat go down with 46 men trapped inside. He had floated alone for 9 hours before rescue came. The Navy had given him a medal. He had given himself nightmares. Now he stood in the rain and counted torpedoes because counting kept the memories quiet. 22, 23, 24, called Chief Torpedo Man Marcus Webb from the forward hatch. Webb was the oldest man on the boat. He had served on submarines since 1925, back when they were death traps that killed their own crews as often as the enemy. He knew every torpedo by the scratches on its casing. He treated them like children, dangerous children that could destroy cities. Lieutenant Thomas Yancey climbed up from below. He was the executive officer, second in command, and he looked like a recruiting poster brought to life. Square jaw. Clear eyes. Naval Academy ring on his finger. He was 26 and had never fired a torpedo at anything except a practice target. His hands shook sometimes when he thought about what was coming, but he had learned to hide them in his pockets. "Sealed orders, Captain," Yancey said. He handed over an envelope marked with red stamps. Rourke opened it. The words were simple. The mission was not. They would patrol the shipping lanes between Truk Lagoon and the Japanese home islands, the busiest enemy waters in the Pacific. Japanese tankers carried oil from the conquered Dutch East Indies along those routes. Japanese transports carried soldiers to fight on Guadalcanal. Without those ships, Japan's war machine would starve. The Sawfish would have 60 days to cause as much damage as possible. Rourke folded the orders and looked at his boat. 73 men would squeeze inside a steel tube barely 27 feet wide. They would sleep beside torpedo racks. They would share air that grew thick with the smell of diesel, sweat, and fear. They would see no sunlight for weeks. Some of them would not come home. Below deck, the crew made their final preparations. Some men wrote letters to wives and mothers. Others sat in silence, staring at photographs they had memorized long ago. In the forward torpedo room, 2 young sailors whispered about the death boats, Gato-Class submarines that had sailed west and never returned. The Argonaut. The Amberjack. The Grampus. Names that had become ghost stories. Word spread through the boat. Fear moved from man to man like a virus. Rourke could feel it when he climbed down the hatch. He saw it in the way his crew avoided his eyes. He understood it because he felt it too, but fear was a luxury they could not afford. At 2,300 hours, the Sawfish cast off her lines. Tugboats guided her through the harbor, past the sunken Arizona, past the oil slicks that still rose from the dead. Then she was free, alone on the dark Pacific, her bow pointed toward enemy waters 3,000 miles away. Rourke stood in the conning tower as the boat descended to patrol depth. The ocean closed over them like a fist. The electric motors hummed. The hull groaned against the pressure. Around him, 73 men breathed recycled air and trusted their lives to steel plates and welded seams. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. It showed his old crew, the men who had drowned near Wake Island, smiling in the sun on a day when death seemed far away. He had carried their faces across 2 oceans. He would carry them across this one too. This time, he whispered to the dead, "We hunt." Above, the Pacific stretched empty and black. Below, the Sawfish sailed west into the war. 24 torpedoes waited in their tubes like patient sharks. The enemy did not know they were coming. The enemy did not know what 24 torpedoes could do. They would learn. The tanker appeared at 0234 hours, a black shape against a blacker sea. She was the Tonin Maru, 14,000 tons of precious cargo crawling toward Japan. Her holds carried enough oil to fuel an aircraft carrier for 6 months. Without that oil, Japanese planes could not fly. Japanese ships could not sail. One tanker could decide the fate of a battle 1,000 miles away. Commander Rourke pressed his eye to the periscope and watched her come. 2 weeks of hunting had led to this moment. 2 weeks of running on the surface at night to charge batteries. 2 weeks of diving at dawn to hide from patrol planes. 2 weeks of waiting, watching, listening. Now the prey had arrived, but she was not alone. 2 destroyers flanked the tanker like wolves guarding a wounded deer. The Fubuki-class escorts were built for one purpose: killing submarines. Their sonar could hear a heartbeat through 50 fathoms of water. Their depth charges could crack a hull like an eggshell. The Japanese had learned to fear American submarines, and they protected their oil ships with everything they had. "Battle stations," Rourke said quietly. The order passed through the boat in whispers. Men moved through narrow passages without speaking. Watertight doors sealed. Chief Webb armed the forward torpedo tubes, 6 weapons ready, their propellers locked, their warheads live. The Sawfish crept forward at 3 knots, silent as a shadow. Lieutenant Yancey stood at the plotting table, calculating angles and distances. His hands were steady now. Fear still lived in his chest, but he had learned to work around it. The mathematics of death required precision. He gave Rourke the numbers. 1,500 yards. Bearing 045. Speed 12 knots. Rourke made his decision. 4 torpedoes. Spread pattern. Maximum probability of hitting a moving target. Fire 1. The boat shuddered as the first torpedo left the tube. Compressed air pushed 3,000 pounds of steel and explosive into the black water. Then another. Then another. Then the 4th. The crew counted silently. 45 seconds to impact at this range. 50 seconds. 55. Had they missed? Had the tanker turned, then the ocean erupted. 2 torpedoes struck the Tonin Maru amidships. The explosions lit the night orange. Steel plates peeled back like paper. Oil poured from the wounds and caught fire on the water. The tanker broke in half, her bow and stern rising toward the sky before sliding beneath the flames, but the destroyers were already hunting. "Dive! Dive!" Rourke shouted. "Take her to 300 feet." The Sawfish dropped like a stone. The crew grabbed pipes and handles as the deck tilted. Then the first depth charge exploded. The sound was like nothing Yancey had ever heard, a crack that seemed to split the world. The boat heaved sideways. Light bulbs shattered. Men fell. A pipe burst in the engine room, spraying hot water across 2 sailors who screamed and kept working. More explosions followed. The Japanese destroyer captains were good. They had triangulated the Sawfish's position from the torpedo tracks. Now they were trying to crush her with pressure waves that could rupture steel. 300 feet, the diving officer called. 320. 350. The hull groaned. Gato-Class submarines were designed for 300 feet. Below that, the ocean began to win. Rivets wept water. Pipes sweated. The pressure gauges crept into the red. Rourke stood motionless at the center of the chaos. His eyes were closed. He was listening to the enemy, tracking the destroyer screws through the water, waiting for patterns. The Japanese were thorough, but they were also predictable. They searched in expanding circles. They dropped charges in grids. If the Sawfish could survive the next hour, the enemy would run out of weapons. 67 depth charges fell that night. Each one felt like a fist punching the hull. Men prayed. Men vomited. One young sailor sobbed quietly in a corner until Chief Webb put a hand on his shoulder and said nothing. Then silence came. The destroyers had exhausted their magazines. Their engines faded into the distance. The Sawfish sat alone in the crushing dark, her crew barely breathing, her hull intact by some miracle of American engineering. Rourke opened his eyes. Damage report. Webb answered from the forward torpedo room. One tube jammed. Minor flooding in the pump room. 2 men burned, one with a broken arm. But they were alive. Surface when safe, Rourke ordered. We reload the tubes tonight. Yancey leaned against the plotting table. His legs were shaking. His uniform was soaked with sweat. He had never felt more alive. He had never felt more terrified. 20 torpedoes remained, the hunt was just beginning. The radio message arrived at 0417 hours, encoded in a cipher the Japanese believed unbreakable. American codebreakers had broken it 18 months ago. Now their stolen secrets painted a picture of death moving across the Pacific, 12 transport ships carrying 8,000 soldiers, tanks, and artillery to reinforce Guadalcanal. If those men reached the island, the Marines fighting there would face a nightmare. Commander Rourke read the decoded message twice. The convoy would pass through his patrol zone in 36 hours. 4 destroyers and 2 light cruisers guarded it. No other American submarines could intercept in time. The Sawfish was alone against an armada. 1 month of patrol had already cost them. They had sunk a cargo ship near Palau and a troop transport east of Truk. 10 torpedoes spent. 14 remained. Chief Webb had repaired the damaged tube, but the boat showed her wounds, a cracked gauge here, a stubborn valve there, the accumulated bruises of combat. Lieutenant Yancey argued for caution. We hit the edges, he said, tracing the convoy route on the chart. Pick off stragglers. Live to fight again. It was sound reasoning. It was also the mathematics of cowardice dressed in officer's language. Rourke knew this because he had made the same calculations himself. The escort screen was too strong. A direct attack was suicide, but 8,000 soldiers were sailing toward American boys who had already bled for every yard of jungle on Guadalcanal. Every transport that reached the island meant more enemy rifles, more enemy artillery, more American graves. We attack at dawn, Rourke said. We position ahead of the convoy and hit them when they silhouette against the sunrise. No one argued. There was nothing left to say. The Sawfish ran on the surface through the night, her diesels pushing her to maximum speed. At 0500, she dove and waited. The crew sat in silence. Some men slept. Most could not. The torpedo men loaded all tubes, 6 forward, 4 aft. 10 weapons ready. At 0547, the first transport appeared in the periscope. Then another. Then 5 more. The horizon filled with ships, fat, slow, heavy with men and machines. The escorts circled like sharks, their sonar pinging through the water. Rourke placed the Sawfish directly in the convoy's path. It was madness. It was also the last thing the Japanese expected. Their escorts watched the flanks because submarines always attacked from the sides. No captain was crazy enough to position himself in front of a moving wall of steel. Forward tubes, fire on my mark. The first transport filled the periscope view. 3,000 men packed into a single hull. Rourke felt nothing. He had stopped feeling weeks ago. Fire 1. Fire 2. Fire 3. The boat rocked as torpedoes left the tubes. Rourke swung the periscope and found another target. Fire 4. Fire 5. Fire 6. Then hard rudder. The Sawfish turned in a tight circle, presenting her stern tubes to the chaos. Aft tubes, fire all. For more torpedoes shot into the convoy. 10 weapons in the water. 10 chances to change the battle for Guadalcanal. The first hits came at 30 seconds. A transport exploded amidships, her cargo of ammunition cooking off in a chain of secondary blasts. Another took 2 torpedoes in the bow and began sinking immediately. A third lost her rudder and drifted into a fourth, the 2 ships grinding together in a screech of tortured metal. 5 hits out of 10. 3 transports sinking. A fourth crippled. Perhaps 2,000 enemy soldiers would never reach Guadalcanal, but the escorts had found them. The first depth charge exploded so close that it threw men against the bulkheads. The lights failed. Emergency red lamps flickered on, painting the control room in blood-colored shadows. Rourke shouted for emergency dive, and the Sawfish dropped toward the bottom. 37 depth charges fell in 12 minutes. The hull cracked near the engine room. Water sprayed inward. The engineering crew fought the breach with wooden plugs and mattresses while the ocean tried to kill them. 2 men died. Petty Officer Hayes was crushed when a pipe collapsed. Seaman Morrison drowned in the flooding before anyone could reach him. Their bodies were carried to the forward torpedo room and covered with blankets. The Sawfish sank past 400 feet. Past 420. Past the point where submarines were supposed to survive. The hull screamed. Men wept. Chief Webb held a wrench in his hands and whispered prayers to a god he had stopped believing in. Then Rourke gave the order that saved them all. Blow all ballast. Emergency surface. The last air reserves flooded into the tanks. The boat rose, groaning, bleeding, but rising. Above, the debris from the sinking transports had confused the enemy sonar. The escorts had lost them in the chaos they had created. The Sawfish escaped into deep water. 4 torpedoes remained. That night, Rourke gathered the crew in the forward compartment. He stood beside the covered bodies and read the names of the dead. He did not speak of glory or victory. He said only, they did their duty. We do ours. Pearl Harbor sent a message, well done. Return to base when able. But home was 3,000 miles away, and the Pacific was full of enemies. The Pacific Ocean is not empty. It only looks that way. Beneath its surface swim currents that have circled the Earth for 10,000 years. Above its waves fly patrol planes searching for the wounded and the slow. And somewhere between the Marshall Islands and Hawaii, the USS Sawfish crawled eastward like a dying animal trying to reach its den. Day 52 of patrol. 1 engine destroyed. Hull patched with steel plates that wept rust. Freshwater rationed to 1 cup per man per day. The food had run out 3 days ago except for rice and canned peaches. 71 men remained alive inside a steel tube that smelled of oil, sweat, and desperation. Commander Rourke had not slept in 40 hours. He stood in the conning tower and watched the horizon through salt-crusted binoculars. They needed to run on the surface to charge batteries. They needed fresh air to keep the crew alive. But every hour on the surface was an hour exposed to enemy eyes. The patrol plane appeared at 1,423 hours, a Japanese Kawanishi flying boat sweeping low over the water. The lookout screamed aircraft, and the Sawfish crash-dived, her battered hull groaning as the ocean swallowed her again. But the plane had seen them. It dropped smoke markers on the water. It circled once and flew east to call for help. 2 hours later, the destroyer arrived. She was the Shikanami, a Fubuki-class escort with a captain who had sunk 3 American submarines in the Solomons. He knew his business. He began a systematic search pattern, his sonar pinging through the water, his depth charges ready. Lieutenant Yancey plotted the enemy's movements on the chart. He's good, Yancey said. Textbook approach. Expanding circles. He'll find us within the hour. Chief Webb stood at the torpedo board. 4 weapons remained. 4 chances to survive. We could run deep and wait him out, Webb suggested. But they all knew the hull could not take much more pressure. The cracks from the convoy battle had spread. Another deep dive might be their last. Rourke studied the chart. The destroyer was hunting in circles, her captain patient and methodical. But every pattern had a weakness. Every hunter had a blind spot. "We don't run," Rourke said. "We attack." The crew stared at him. A damaged submarine with 4 torpedoes against a fresh destroyer with a full magazine of depth charges. It was insane. It was also the only option that did not involve waiting to die. The Sawfish crept forward on electric motors, following the destroyer's wake. The enemy's own propellers masked the sound of the submarine's approach. His own sonar could not hear through the noise he was making. Rourke watched through the periscope as the Shikanami passed 200 yards ahead, her hull huge and dark against the fading light. Forward tubes, match bearings. The destroyer turned. In 10 seconds, she would be directly overhead. Fire 1. Fire 2. The torpedoes left the tubes at point-blank range. There was no time for the enemy to react. No time to turn. No time to run. Both torpedoes struck the Shikanami amidships. The explosions lifted her stern clear of the water. Her depth charges cooked off in a chain reaction that broke her spine. She sank in 4 minutes, her crew never understanding what had killed them. The Sawfish surfaced into a sea of debris and silence. Oil spread across the water. Wood and rope floated past. Someone was screaming in the darkness, a Japanese sailor clinging to wreckage. The screaming stopped after a while. .2 torpedoes remained. But there would be no more hunting. "Set course for Pearl Harbor," Rourke ordered. "All ahead standard." 10 days later, the mountains of Oahu rose from the horizon like a promise. Tugboats guided the Sawfish through the harbor entrance. Crowds lined the docks, other submariners, nurses, officers waiting with clipboards. A Navy band played something triumphant. Nobody on the Sawfish heard it. They were too tired to hear anything except the silence inside their own heads. Rourke ordered his men to stand at attention on deck. They were thin. Their uniforms were stained with oil and salt and blood. Some of them cried. Most of them simply stood, staring at the shore like men who had forgotten what land looked like. The patrol report went to Naval Intelligence: 7 ships sunk, including 3 troop transports, 1 tanker, 2 cargo vessels, and 1 destroyer. An estimated 40,000 tons of enemy shipping destroyed. An estimated 4,000 enemy soldiers killed before reaching combat. 24 torpedoes expended. 2 men lost. 71 returned. The report was classified. No newspapers wrote about the Sawfish. No medals made the front page. That was the nature of submarine warfare. Silent service. Silent victories. Silent graves. Chief Webb supervised the loading of new torpedoes for the next boat preparing to deploy. A young sailor fresh from training school watched him work. "What's it like out there?" the sailor asked. Webb watched the torpedoes slide into the loading hatch. 24 of them. The same number they had carried west 2 months ago. The same number that would sail into the Pacific tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until the war ended or the sea claimed them all. "It's quiet," Webb said. "Quieter than you'd think." He walked away. The young sailor stared at the open hatch. Beyond the harbor, the Pacific stretched westward toward the enemy. Somewhere out there, Japanese tankers were carrying oil. Japanese transports were carrying soldiers. Japanese admirals were looking at maps and wondering why their ships kept disappearing. They would keep wondering. The Gato-Class submarines would see to that. The sea wolves were hunting.